Ray, how's it?
Yeah,
Thanks for
yeah, it's my pleasure. Sounds like a fun project you got here.
well, it keeps me, I've busy sort of having enforced change in my career and looking for something.
Yeah,
Um, I wanted a way to try and build more engagement with the group and with intergenerational old boys.
right.
And I know that you've been you're one of the best supporters on the Facebook group. You post and you comment a lot, which I'm very grateful for.
Sure. Yeah, it's a fun place to be in. I mean, I am just so envious of what those guys get these days. I mean, all the clubs they can do and everything. It's just amazing.
I went back probably 3 years ago now was the last time, and I went back for the Easter Festival, rugby festival,
Uh-huh.
which they've been doing for about 27 years. Um, we did a bit of a tour around the school, and I mean, we were blessed with the school we had in our age, in your age, in our age, and with the facilities we had. And I looked, and I was they've got this indoor water polo aquatic center now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's unbelievable.
Right.
And that sits above a world-class gym, like weights gym,
Yeah, yeah.
and physio and all the rest of it. And because when we were, I don't know about you, but the gym room used to be near the main entrance underneath. And it was like a little moldy, dusty room with weights from about 1940s.
At the main entrance to the David Quad.
Yeah, somewhere near. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was somewhere
That
there.
sounds like when I was at school, that sounds like the armory.
Yeah, I think that's probably it.
Yeah.
That's that's funny. So, by way of introduction, you were at St John's from 57 to 66.
Correct.
You matriculated in 65 and did 1 year of sixth form.
That's correct, yeah.
So you would have been at 61 was when you went to college.
Yeah. First year in college. Remove.
And in the college, were you a boarder? Because you were
Yeah.
a Nash.
I was boarded the whole 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, right. A lot to talk about, obviously. But let me put everyone in context. I like to put us into a bit of historical context here.
Okay.
So in 57, there's a very famous spoof that goes around on the internet every April Fool's. And you've probably seen it, but the BBC did a spoof about Swiss spaghetti production.
Yeah.
Where it was black and white, where they go along, and you can Google it.
Yeah.
They went and filmed in Switzerland or Italy in some way. I said it was Switzerland, but it was the spaghetti growing off trees.
Yeah.
And because spaghetti was a an exotic food back in in the 50s, but that video came out in 57 when you went to remove.
Yeah.
The South African player Russell Endine was the first
Yeah.
batsman to be dismissed for handling the ball in a test match.
Right.
The first new conscripts into the Bundeswehr, the German military, reformed military. So 12 years after the end of the war. And Die Stem became the national anthem in 57.
Not know that. I didn't know. I just assumed it had been there right since like 1948. I never knew it came just in as late as 57.
Yeah, it was 57. It was God Save the Queen before that.
Yeah.
And in that year, at the age of 15, Paul McCartney meets John Lennon at the Wilton Church Hall.
Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then in 66, the province won the Currie Cup. District 6 in Cape Town is declared white.
Yeah.
And I'll ask you about that, see if, what awareness there was. Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd was stabbed to death.
I don't mean to treat that lightly. I might come through later on. My politics tend to be on the left quite a bit. in '66, later in the year, I got promoted to school prefect, and I went into McCulloch and Bothwell in town and got my school prefect's tie. And I went across. My mom worked in the house to show her. And I walked in the door. She just had this look of horror on her face because her colleagues tended to be more conservative. And she thought I was going to come in and say, "Hey, have you heard the bastard's dead?" I didn't. But I just always remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, yeah, fortunate you didn't.
So I don't know. Maybe I'll just speak out of turn sometimes.
Yeah, we all did.
If you get, you can become less cautious.
Have you got any other recollection of the enormity of that?
No, not really. It was just kind of amazing because it's the whole thing seems so improbable. I mean, like the prime minister seemed untouchable, and that this guy, I think he was a Greek-born messenger or something in the parliament, and came in and stabbed the guy, and it just seemed like crazy. But it was just kind of at that time I was becoming more and more involved in kind of protests and anti-apartheid stuff. Yeah, it was interesting times for me.
Yeah, interesting. So you're a lot more aware than we were, because I remember we were obviously aware of stuff, but perhaps we were just so up our own assholes that, and in sport and, and girls and everything else. But I don't remember being. The only sort of political things I remember during college was there was a bombing campaign, and at one point, I think we were about standard 8, so 86. We had to paint different symbols on our bags in white to ensure that any teacher or prefect walking past could identify that it was an actual student's bag and not a
Yeah.
and not a bomb.
Oh wow.
And I think the first one was a white cross, and then I think they changed after that. So I remember, and we were young. We thought we were going to live forever, so we did it. But we thought it was a bit of a joke, And
Yeah.
but when because we had, I mean, St John's now is probably fully integrated. Probably, I don't know the numbers, but probably if not 50-50, slightly majority more black South Africans versus white South Africans. Were there any black South Africans in your school? Your year?
No college. As far as I remember, there were no Japanese. So it was pretty much white oriented. No, the students came from all over the place. We had somebody from Ghana, we had a guy from Hong Kong, but all white.
It was probably more of. I'm not sure if. Yeah, it would be interesting to find out if there was an actual policy shift, or if it was just a matter of socio-economic ability to be able to afford to send, because they were so oppressed and segregated that they didn't have the money to send a.
Well, I at that time, like in the 50s, and I think right through maybe until as far as 60s, I think it was against the law to have blacks integrated like that. And even like the following, when I left college and went to university, there were complex laws. Like if you had a party at home, and this is officially, if we had blacks, I could have blacks to a party, but in my house, they had to supposedly pour their own booze. Could not pour a glass of beer for them. I mean, nobody adhered to that, but that was kind of so. I think at St John's they were bound by government rulings rather than any economic thing. And also at that time, long before the Carter administration came in, there were no kind of black diplomats in South Africa.
Mm.
So, that would have been where the apartheid kind of laws would have been vague. This guy is in fact an American, so he can come to school or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, what a time, eh?
Amazing.
Go on. This is your time.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing time. I don't know if you remember the prep school at all. In 57 and 58, we didn't have a proper library. From the prep quad on the second story, grounded next story up. There was a long passageway, which was a kind of library, and they had a board there. And every day they would put up, I think, the front page of the Daily Mail in the morning and the front page of the Star at night, spread out. So that was our news. Well, in one of them, there was something about either the Prime Minister or some hotshot in the government, and some of the students decided to spit all over this. And of course, my housemaster just went totally apeshit.
Really?
At a meeting, you can't do this. They're allowed to print what they can. And anyway, spitting on newspapers isn't going to help anything. It was a storm in a teacup, so at that stage, to all intents and purposes, the school was kind of left of center.
Yeah, I think it always was in my time, for my era as well. Finish off the last couple of things for context. 66 notable South African births: Alan Donald, Ilana Meyer, and David Chebe. So a cricketer, 5,000 meter runner, and a marathon runner. And then one that connected me sort of globally was in 66, because my father was a world-renowned, the leading mine design expert in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And he was born in Wales, and he did some of his doctorate working in the mines there. And he was there for the Aberfan disaster.
Yeah.
And that was in 1966.
Right.
Okay, so you were a bit of a bookworm. Do you remember any big books from that time?
No, not
66.
I'm in my house.
The biggest selling book was The Source by James Michener.
Oh, yeah.
Valley of the Dolls, Jacqueline Susan, and Robert Crichton, The Secret of Santa Victoria.
That is one of the best books ever. That is a terrific book.
Yeah, brilliant. What else? Number one song, Mamas and Papas, California Dreamin'.
I can feel for that down here now. All the leaves are brown outside.
Yeah. And I don't know this movie. The best actor was Lee Marvin and Kat Ballou.
Don't know the movie.
Nominees: Richard Burton, Laurence Olivier, Rod Steiger, Julie Christie won for Darling, etc. Yeah, so that puts it in perspective of where we were as a culture. So when you got into the college, was there a I'm trying to get a feel for, if you know the movie Dead Poet Society, that was sort of set in the 60s, 50s, 60s. And I've talked about with the other guys, and I will in the future, I'm sure, about that we probably felt that we were the last few years of the generation before things properly transitioned away from the old rugby school, old Tom school days, sorts of fagging and jacking and bullying and being put in the sheet and tossed up and, all that. And, I know that there's been in the news at some of the South African boys' schools, not St. John's, but one or two where they've had some issues with bullying. And I think that's going to be something which is present time immemorial.
Yeah.
It was, but within the private schools, it was systematized. And what was your memory? Because boarding school, from speaking to some day boys, their belief is that they had a slightly different experience from the boarders.
Oh yeah. Well, the year I got into college, into removed, about a week before I was due to go to school, I was with another relative and some other folk. We were in a car accident. I got a big gash in my head and concussion. So I didn't get actually to school until about 2 weeks after school had started. So what that meant for me was that I'd missed the whole of the organized initiation. And so I was like this lone buck on the plane. And boy, people were just hammering me, and they were asking all sorts of these arcane questions, like, what does GPO mean? A General Post Office. Bang, bam, bam. No, it's Gunnery Positions Officer. And things like that. So that was different. And what was really different was that I'd missed the scheduling for fagging. So I used to, normally you had 2 fags on a day. My day ended up being just me. So I'd have to go. And to their credit, some guys would actually volunteer to come and help me on my fag day.
Nice.
It wasn't too bad. Adrian Pike was head of Nash. Real nice guy, laid back guy, calm guy. The prefect's common room. Yeah, it was kind of interesting place. You know, you could be fagging there, and you would hear all the senior gossip going on and all this, and you dare not show that you had heard. So if it was a joke, you didn't laugh. If it was interesting, you didn't kind of look up. You know, you just carried on. You know, making tea, whatever it was. Don't know whether this is an apocryphal story, but I believe at least in one of the houses, and I cannot believe it was Nash, but it could have been. Apparently, the beginning of Fag, the guys were told to make tea. So the guy goes in, puts water in the electric kettle, puts tea into the electric kettle, puts milk into the electric kettle, plugs it in, and of course that trashed the whole thing. So that was one of the stories. Otherwise, didn't have too much of a problem, and I never really came across bullying at all. Maybe because I'm a kind of bigger guy, I don't know. But on the other hand, days when I wasn't doing sport, round about between the B and the C rugby fields, there used to be a tennis court, and it was kind of run down. You could play tennis on it, but above that, kind of in the hill, was a little viewing place. And you could go there. It was really run down and sit down, and nobody could see you from the field. So I would go there with a mate of mine, and we'd go and study there or read or do anything. Nobody could find us. And then we'd come out just before dinner time and suddenly say, "We've been looking everywhere. You know, one of the prefects wants to see you." Oh, that's fine. You know, I was around, and you just didn't find me. So yeah, it wasn't a bad year. The fagging just didn't bug me that much. It was that you always had the light at the end of the tunnel. In 5 years' time, I'm going to be on the other side of this.
Yeah.
So I think the guys who had it worse were the people who fagged and then didn't get there when they were seniors. They must have been twisted. But
was there cadets when you were
yeah,
there?
yeah. And this was another thing. Because of my car accident, I was on kind of light duties. I couldn't play sport for a while, and I couldn't march around the field. So for us derelicts, they had the signals troop. And you got generally, you know, people like me, because you couldn't be doing the proper marching and all that. And it was nice. I learned Morse code. I learned semaphore. And I had a good time. And I stayed in signals troop right through to the end. At the end, I was in signals, and I had kind of fun there. I could read Morse, and that was kind of neat. Yeah, it wasn't a bad place.
Do you guys wear boaters then?
It was there. It was not as prevalent as it seems to be now, and it might be even more prevalent before we were. I would say 10-15% of the guys had them, but it wasn't a big deal thing.
Yeah, it's mandatory now, and it was reintroduced because we didn't have them. They'd stopped them a couple of years before I got there, and then they reintroduced them a couple of years after.
Yeah,
So just interesting to see what time and how things have changed, and
right,
because when you're there in an institution like that, it seems like everything's been there forever.
right. Yeah, there was a big shake-up. I venture to say maybe in 59. 59 was a big change for South Africa, for St. John's. And a whole lot of things changed, and we can talk about that a bit later. But one of the things was they tightened up on the uniform. Before that, it was quite common to see a guy in a leather bomber jacket or something like that.
Oh, really?
That went, and then it was really strict after that, except for during exam period. In exam period, generally a uniform was relaxed, and by and large, it just meant you could mix and match whatever you had. So that was kind of cool.
That's really interesting. Because one of the questions I was going to have later was sort of formality in social settings and things like that. But when I was there, it was, and I think I mentioned this on the first one, because I came to St. John's about a week late when I first got there. So I didn't experience the first day. And the next term was my first official first day of a term, and which would have been for you. And so the rule was that you could wear winter uniform all year long if you wanted. You could wear summer uniform in the summer term, but you had to wear the full school winter uniform on the first day and the last day of term. And so I rocked up summer term in my khakis instead of my blues and twos because they hadn't been there for the first day of the first
Right.
term. So I got a better stick for that. But it's interesting that it was more relaxed in your day than it was in ours.
Yeah, I couldn't say that was a rule. I would I think maybe just the custom for the last day you were in uniform because you were probably going to go home that afternoon. So most of your other stuff would have been packed as a border. And first day, I can't remember any rule about it. I couldn't tell you one way or the other whether we could or couldn't.
Yeah, as I say, I think things just changed with
Yeah,
different administrations. And
headmaster,
who was your headmaster?
Dean Yates.
Okay. And you said he was a positive influence for you.
It was an interesting guy. Yeah, we had our run-ins. He was a scary guy, and he used to heel tips on his heels, so you could hear this guy walking. So it was pretty rare to be caught by him because you could hear him coming like 100 paces away. But so I didn't have much interaction with him until I was quite senior, and then.
Do you know what? Sorry to interrupt, Ray. I was there in the 80s. I heard about Dean Yates.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, and there must have been a couple of headmasters in between, and there must have been 5 before that. But the fact that he stood out and intergenerationally he made his mark.
Yeah, he was a force to be reckoned with. And a couple of stories. One, there was some work on the road that was the other side of the rugby fields, and they had
Patrick's.
And all this, and I was down there and I was talking to the guys who were driving the graders, and they said, you know, there's this guy who's bald and he comes up here. And I said, oh, that's our headmaster. So they said, what's he like? I said, you know, arrow straight, arrow straight. He said, you should have seen him yesterday. I had my grader parked across the road and he couldn't get his car through, and you should have heard his language. And I thought, I did not know that. So that was one of them. So up till then, in my matric year, I had kind of discovered booze. And
Tell me which booze?
November, just before matric. And so we were going to go out to the wilds, buy some hooch, go to the wilds, drink it up. Well, the day was poxy. It was just raining. So I had a key to one of the libraries, and I had actually opened pretty much any door in the college that didn't have a Yale lock. It just, did them. So I could get into the science labs. We went there. We had our booze. We had gin, tonic, beers, everything. And there were about 8, 10 of us, I can't remember, my mates. And we were just boozing it up, and we got slammed. And so then we finished up, tidied up the room, went. I was in the shower, and one of the juniors comes in, and from that day to this, I cannot tell you which guy it was. He said, the headmaster wants to see you. I thought, oh, shit.
The words of doom.
So I said, what's going on? Apparently, 2 of my mates, Alex Mavro and George Cunningham, had been running through the Pelican Quad, yelling and screaming because they were buzzed out of their minds. And Dean Yates was there, and he said, hey, come here. What's going on? And apparently, the rumor had it, George Cunningham just burped. And what he did, and I think we were on the road to expulsion, he got these guys and he put them each in, had them each put in a separate ward up in the sick room. Guy came, and this junior came and told me, so I went into Yates' office, knock, knock. He says, why are you here? So I said, for drinking. I mean, like, duh, you daft. Why did you call me? So he said, oh, and then he got me into the sick room. So then we had a darling of a sister who was in charge of the sick room, McCarthy. Alice McCarthy, I think her name was. McCarty.
She was lovely as well.
Yeah, and she was saying, the sad thing is you're going to have to leave St. John's. And I thought, shit, I mean, I'm just going to be in so much trouble from home. I may as well just jump out the window. Then Willie Andrews, our housemaster, he saved the day. I don't know whether he had a spy network. He found out about this. So he went and found out the other guys, and quite a few of them from Nash. He rounded them up and just beat each one of them 6. So now you had part of the team who'd been punished. They couldn't be expelled because it would be like double jeopardy.
Yeah.
So then Yates calls us down, and Mavro and Cunningham got 6 each. I got 8 each, and I owned up, and we were gated for the rest of the term. So that was that was my first big encounter with him. Then in 6th form, what happened? Oh yeah, so because of this boozing, I never got to be a prefect. I was apparently slated to be head of Nash, and I didn't. And that was just, I mean, a bit majorly at the time, but I would have been
Yeah,
a asked for head of anything. I just wasn't ready for it. Anyway, that was a good time actually for me. So I don't know how it was with your time, but you'd have the tables in Darragh Hall, and you'd have like 4 guys on each side and a prefect or a monitor or something.
yeah, yeah.
So I was up at the top of this table, and I had read somewhere that on crack plates you could get bacteria and all that, including trench mouth. And it wasn't often with the cutlery there, the crockery there, but if it plate came with a crack, I would just break it, bam, on the table. Then I had to take it to the head of school and say, "You've got a broken plate." Well, after about 5 weeks of doing this, and it wasn't, it must have been a total of about 4 or 5 plates. It wasn't like
Yeah.
every.
Wasn't like a Greek wedding.
Yeah. Yeah. So eventually, head of school, John Yates, came to me and says, Dean Yates, the headmaster, says you've got to start doing this, and he wants to see you. So I went there, and again, he was all over my case. And I was telling him, I've read this. So he had me we had a proper dietitian in charge of the kitchen, and went to her, and she explained, all sorts of crap about dishwashers and high temperature water and all this. And so I stopped that, but I had this problem with Yates. And then later on in the year, 2 guys from Nash were caught stealing candy bars from the tuck shop.
Yeah.
And, it was like 2 candy bars. So they got punished and gated and beaten and all the shit. But then they went and put up a note. Yates had put up on a notice board that these guys had got caught stealing and that they weren't allowed to go to the tuck shop for the rest of the term and this. And I went to him and I said, I think this is like draconian. I said, this is like putting people in the stocks. They had their punishment and all this. And then he got all bent out of shape with me, like duck and done stealing. And this was done to stop stealing and all that. And so we didn't part, we just separated, agreeing to disagree. And that kind of died down eventually. So then I leave school and I go to the army and I want to apply for the candy stripe, be an officer. And so I asked Yates for a letter of recommendation, and he gave me quite a nice one. The only thing I can really remember, and I really thought this was pretty classy of him, is that he said something like to the effect, under any circumstances, Williams will look after his men. And I thought, yeah, that's what I wanted. So that was my influence from him, that in spite of probably thinking I was kind of a rebel without a cause, he
saw the positive in even though there was disagreement, and that's enlightened, isn't it?
That I thought. And then what kept me in my mind for a long time after that, from the drinking thing, he said to me, I said, apologize, and I'll never drink again, sort of crap, the normal thing you go through. And he said, it doesn't matter what people say, you've got to see what they do. That kept that in my mind for the whole of my life. And that's kind of important because people say stuff, but you watch what they do, and that's what they are.
Yeah, you said that was one of the lines that has stuck with you throughout your life. And then you also sort of brought up Father Salter, who was there when I was there.
Yeah.
And he must have been, I don't know, you must have been 90.
Yeah.
Easily 90. I mean, he was so wizened. And boy, he had a temper though, hey, if you pissed him around.
Oh, yeah. But what's kind of brought him to mind quite a bit is around about 59 or 60 sometime, some yobbo went in and scrawled on the toilet walls. Well, I mean, this is prep school. I mean, it couldn't have been really that offensive just because the guys were clues. There's probably crude drawings of women or something. I don't know. And they used a pokey talk and they did this. So there was a big hoo-ha. And so Manby, who was the headmaster down there, had called everybody together and said, this is no go. And then he said that Father Salter had gone and cleaned it up because he said to Father Salter, you don't have to do this. And Father Salter said, somebody has to do it. And if not, if not me, who's it going to be? And that kind of stuck with me. You're going to have some sort of shit job, but somebody's got to do it. So that was that. But yeah, he had the temper and he knew it. He said to us, I've got a bad temper and I'm working on quarreling it. but it never seemed to be correlated very closely to me.
And just to put it in perspective, for those who didn't know subsequent to the 80s, he was a tiny man.
Yeah.
And he was like bird thin when he was with me, and he was probably only about 5'7", something like that. He was
Prep school kid, he seemed enormous, but yeah, he was very lithe and thin, and
yeah.
it burns me that he got some sort of Eagle Award and nothing was mentioned of Salter. I never saw JP do anything worthwhile, and but so that burned a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he was a very interesting character. He'd be a character in a movie about St. John's, because he was such a his personality and also his looks, they stand out as being sort
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
Angus Rose and Angus Rose. Tell me about Angus.
So unconventional. He took me for English, I think, low four, upper four, somewhere around there. Really nice because he knew a lot of stuff. I think I think he's like my family and other animals. I think his family had moved from the UK to Portugal, and he knew a lot about Portugal and all that, and he knew some Portuguese. And he would take us through poetry and literature, that, and write essays. And he really got me into writing and stuff. I enjoy writing and poetry and things like that. And generally, in his classes, you'd have the class. Let's say I can't remember how long they were. Let's say they were 40 minutes. So
Yeah,
you'd
I
have
think so.
5 minutes of class, and the last 5 minutes it would just be off the wall questions. What was this? What's that? Does anybody know? Can anybody recite 5 lines of poetry? All sorts of stuff like that to keep you hopping. He was good. I liked him a lot, and I learned a lot from him. And he was
Cool.
good with language. And in fact, when I went to uni, did engineering, and they had decided then it was kind of important that engineers should be able to communicate one with the other. And he was running a class of improving both listening and speaking to get your message across. So, yeah.
Another one. Another positive. Now, I know you're not in contact with them, but I just want to give a shout out to some of the names that you mentioned to me beforehand, in case any of them end up listening or any family members. So there was Chris Voltason from Hill, Ron White from Nash, Chris Dennis Nash, Tony Wellington Nash, John Monash Nash, Rodney Hons, Clayton potentially, Chris
Yeah.
King Nash, Rory Kerr Nash, Alex Mavrocordatos Nash, and George Cunningham Nash. So if anybody knows them, or if they've joined, if there's family members, Ray would love to
Yeah.
potentially be in contact.
Yeah.
So tell me about did you sneak out other than the booze and the...
Really sneak out so much. We got the bounds when I was in the college were quite generous. You could go up just to Louis Botha Avenue. Just the other side that there's it was a cafe we used to call it Top Tuck. And we could go there, but no further than that across Louis Botha. But on the other side from the wilds, you could wander up right across to the Joburg Zoo and be inbound.
Really? Was it fenced? Was St. Patrick's Road fenced?
Is that the back one by the rugby fields?
Yeah.
If it was fenced, the fence was rusty and fallen down. But yeah, actually, that was kind of interesting too. You know how the college fields are terraced down, AB. So at the back of them, towards St. Patrick's Road, there was a bit of a slope, and the guys went in there and they carved out little caves for themselves, and they would
Really?
put cardboard if they're lucky, could find some corrugated iron, and they could go down there and smoke or do anything like
Really?
that. You wouldn't know. And so, yeah, I mean, the limit to our bounds was basically you had to be up at 4:15, I think, for roll call, and then you had to be at dinner. So, excuse me, unless you had sports or anything, you could wander around. So, right to the zoo, which was still in bounds, you could go to the War Museum. So that would kind of be where I would have snuck out to.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
much of an excuse to get an exit to go into town from between silent reading and roll call.
Where did your parents live?
They lived in Bedford View, which was a little bit east of Joburg. So, I mean, they were close to St. John's, but when I was growing up, that area was kind of sparsely populated.
Yeah, I bet.
there weren't many other guys my age to play with. And B, my gran was living with us because my mom worked. She had to work so that I could go to St. John's. And so I think my dad said, guy and two doting women in the house. And my dad was a Brit, and his parents had been in Italy at the time. He'd been at boarding school in England from the age of 7 onwards, and then later on at boarding school in Switzerland. So he had no problem sending me to school. And my mom said, well, if you don't like the first term, we'll take you out. And, after about the first fortnight, 6 weeks or so, I loved it. I had like 70 brothers. And in the prep school, we had this great hobbies room. And they had tools there. I mean, hand tools, hand drills, screwdrivers, hammers. And there were nails there and things like that. And then any kind of scrap wood that the school had from maintenance work was put there. You could go and build things like little boats and sail them in the pond or anything. It was cool. I had a good time.
Which sort of segues very, very nicely into you used to do military radios.
That was a hoot. That room that you spoke about right at the beginning, where you said was a gym or something, that used to be. I think that was the armory where you kept the .22s from the Boer War that we used on the radio. And scrounging around there, they had these old tank radios. They were enormous and heavy. So John Nash and myself, we got 2 of these, and Willie Andrews gave us a cupboard in Nash. I don't know what it was like when you were there, but the newer part of Nash up on the top floor with the junior dorms, well, off that landing was a little cupboard. I mean, it could just barely fit 2 guys and a couple of radios, and we had some batteries there. And we would go and play there, especially on like Saturday night, because with those kind of radios, nighttime you got a better reception. So we could pick up stuff kind of like hams. Wanted to transmit to us or somebody else. Well, the dials were just old and unreliable. So to get the frequency, we would tune into Lorenzo Mark's radio, and then we would just go a little bit to one side of that. And apparently that sometimes there would be a bit of a bounce, and people who were listening to Ellen would suddenly find these 2 lads talking to each other. So yeah, that was kind of fun. But it was kind of more fun from an engineering point of view than actually any practical use.
Yeah, but it all adds to the pattern, doesn't it? It all adds to the experience at St. John's and your experience, your generational experience. When I'm with my mate, and you'll be the same, we had a ticky box in the house, which was the only form of communication with the outside world. And obviously the senior guys were first, and you had to wait your turn for your 5 minutes.
We never had any in the house. We only had the one, and for the whole school, the only
Really?
workshop. And a handset and the mouthpiece there had a little screw place. And if you got a wire and grounded it and you touched that, you didn't have to put a ticky in. So you could dial in and you touch that, and boy, you got a cord going. That was kind of cool. So yeah.
That's again, it shows the difference. I mean, because there was a phone in each house.
Oh, okay.
And it was in the sort of the main thoroughfare in Nash. It was in the main thoroughfare just outside the housemaster's office. And yeah, big great thing.
Yeah. At the time that I was there, it kind of was discouraged especially for the boarders, to be in touch with your parents too regularly. If you weren't seeing your parents on the weekend, you had to write a letter to them on Sunday, and your housemaster would look at it and scan it and mail it. So other than that, there wasn't a lot of help to be in touch with your folks. I mean, obviously, if you were sick or something, the sister would phone up and tell your folks. But other than that, no. The kind of in the prep, there was a guy called Stokes, and there was another guy, and this other guy, his mom used to come every day.
Really?
Or Austin, and she would come. And of course, this was mortifying the rest of us were mortified for him. He seemed to think it was okay. Stokes hated this guy. He just hated him. Now, Stokes used to play around with electricity. He just loved it. Normally, most guys would get like a battery and have a switch and turns on the light. He would use so this went on, and Stokes, I think, was beaten out of 7 every week. He was always in trouble. But one day, he says to the other guy, whose mom used to come. He said, "Hey, hold these two wires." And this guy's holding his two wires. He throws the switch, and the guy got like 220 volts. And Stokes had to go. Fortunately, the other guy didn't die. I don't know how. So, yeah, that was Stokes. He was a good guy.
I remember a story when I think we were probably standing at 8 or 9, and in the science block, which was off Clayton Quad, when I was there, and they were sitting on the science desk. I don't know why, but they're always higher. You sat on stools rather than seats. And in front of you was the connections for the gas, and then there were plugs there as well. And so, boys being boys, someone got smart and decided to open up a paperclip, put it into the two bottom holes, and then turn on, and then it just molten metal just sparks, and often it would short out the whole block, so we'd get out of the lesson. But then, not being satisfied with that, we thought, how can we put bigger things in there to get a bigger explosion, and so we'd get thicker wire, and then eventually I was hammering in a compass into the bottom, and I was like doing like this, and then next to me was a guy called Nick Alp, who's a top lawyer in Joburg now with Webb Wenzel, and he leaned across with a wooden ruler, and it was a perfect shot, first time, just flicked the switch on as I'm holding it. And my arm went numb for about an hour afterwards. It was brilliant. Where was the boundaries of the world? Because when I was there, Rivonia was like sticks. There was nothing, it was big properties, a lot of felt, all the way through to Midrand, and then, and now it's one big city, all the way through to Pretoria. So where was sort of the end of the earth? There was Bedford View on the east, and then in the north. Was that where you'd go out with mates? Where would you socialize, or would you go to friends' houses?
As the boarders, we rarely went to other folks' houses because half of them didn't live there. But what we would go to, down towards the Joburg railway station, I think it might have been on Plain Street, I can't remember now exactly, there was a real dive called the Phoenix Bar. And it was run by a really cantankerous old German guy. And we would go there. And the thing was, it was such a dive. We were like 100% sure no master would ever set his foot in there and, booze it up. They had this great German beer, which was terrific. It's all dinkum German stuff, like the beer there. And they would have something like German sausages or German pork. And it was all very afforded. And there's a story about that. In my last year there in sixth form, there was a guy who I mentioned, Chris King. Unfortunately for him, his mom had died earlier in the year, but he stayed on at school, and he kind of seemed to have got on with it. He was carrying on okay. And then, lo and behold, towards the end of the year, one of the matrons died. We had about 4 or 5 matrons who looked after our clothes and mending and laundry and supervised that kind of stuff. So this lady passed away. So Bloggs, Dean Yates, in his wisdom, decided that the prefect should attend the funeral. So most of us by that time had maybe been to one funeral or two in their lives with a relative. Well, this was not Church of England, not Episcopalian, it was some other church. And it was like an open coffin. And the husband was up there, and he was howling and like a coyote. And it was just devastating. It was just such a scenario. So after the service, and I had my driver's license then.
Really?
Yeah, I could get my motorcycle license, I think, at 17, and my driver's license at 18. So straight after matric, I got my driver's license, and it was my folks' car, but I could take it once or twice if I needed it. So I said, about 4 other guys, and I think they were probably most of the Nash prefects, let's take Chris down to the Phoenix and let him calm down from this ordeal. So we did that. And we didn't get plastered, but, we'd had a bit. And so we got back, and sure enough, somebody found out about this. So the next day again, guess who calls? Dean Yates comes in. So I go there expecting a whole nother thing. And man, it was just smooth sailing. He said, like, what happens? I said, well, look, Chris King, his mom and this and that. And I said, the service was terrible. And we just felt it. So we thought, we should let him unwind before going back to school. So all he said to me is, do you think you're going to become an alcoholic? Like, dude, I'm 18. No. So he just let me go. So I thought, well, this is totally amazing. I mean, what have you done with the headmaster? Because I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And after that, we come to the groundsman, and this guy was like an Irish guy, well known for being under the influence by about 4 PM, pretty much any day, to this funeral. So he said to me, Williams, what did you think of that service yesterday? I said, I thought it was the most terrible thing I've ever seen. I said, it was terrible. This guy howling and carrying on there. So he said, yes, I told the headmaster this morning, if I were a drinking man, I would have got drunk. I thought, that's why DES let me off, because he knew I had a colleague. So, yeah, that was kind of fun.
So a couple of the story that you sort of just gave one-liner for, which I need a fair bit more information. It involves formaldehyde.
Yeah.
Because
So
the only knowledge I have is the killing of rats for dissection, or or in the movies. So what happened?
we went through a stage at school where, I don't know whether it was an epidemic or whatever happened, but people were getting plant awards, verrucas, soles of their feet. So after showers ended probably about 6:30, we would go off to dinner. One of the staff would come in and pour formaldehyde over all the shower floors. So, and then the change room was now closed, and you had all this. Well, on this particular day, we'd been at a track meet, at Rudaport or somewhere, and I don't know whether the bus broke down or just we came home late, and so I went to shower, and I was formaldehyde, and I went through that. Well, boy, I just practically stopped breathing the next day. So went to the sister, and she shoved me in there. I got oxygen, and I had this oxygen mask on. And so, I mean, right from when I was a kid, I would get croup. So I knew that my lungs weren't my strongest organ, but this formaldehyde finished it. So that was it. So as a result of that, I was in the sick room for a couple of weeks with this oxygen, and it messed with my matric prep. I was out of class for that just before the mock matric up in June, I think. And no, it must have been later because I missed being in the play. One of the understudies took my part, which bit majorly. But Tony Wellington, yeah, that was nasty. And so when COVID came, I was scared out of my mind. I thought, if this is going to hit my lungs, and I know I've got problems there, and we just hunkered down inside. My wife, who was a realtor, stopped taking clients from out of town out in her car and all that. We kept a very low profile. And so I could survive. But it did frighten me for a while.
Well, you said, and that was matrics, but before that, you'd been a middle distance track runner.
Yeah, I liked running. And so I just, I'm a big guy. So sprinting, it just takes me too long to accelerate. I like tees and mile. So I represented the school. I didn't break any records or anything like that, but I represented the school.
Fair enough.
Like at the beginning of the year when we had the tabloids, my running was fine. I just couldn't do high jump and I couldn't do hurdles. I mean, I just can't take off and land. It just gets my body.
So you just ran.
Yes, just about. But other than that, so I had a good. So when I started off in college, you had to take 2 summer sports, and so I was taking track and athletics, as we called it, and swimming. And then after a while, Potty Chamberlain, who was our athletics master, said, hey, if you like to, you can drop the swimming and you can do double ath. And that was just great. I used to like it. We go running. And then so he talked a bit about going out, cruising around. We could go on long runs, going up and down Munro Drive and things like that, just running. So that wasn't too bad. But I wasn't.
Munro Drive was a killer.
Yeah, it was. But I wasn't stellar, and I made do, but yeah.
Interesting.
The advantage of being a smaller school in size that you were going to do it, even if you weren't, because there weren't enough really good people ahead of you.
And which were the same competition? Well, who were the school competitions at the time? Who were the main schools you remember competing against?
Helpmakar and Jeppy. I don't know who was out. Rudaput, excuse me, I can't remember who was out at Rudaput. Rudaput was interesting because it would be a triangular match. The school at Rudaput was co-ed. And so the girls from the co-ed school would compete against another girls' school, and the boys would compete against us. And that was kind of a fun place to go because it's really sexist. But the girls would do what they called home ec or something like that, where they would bake little cakes and all that. So after the match, we would have all this nosh that these girls had made up for us. But also, at that school, they did javelin throwing. And so I got to throw a javelin. Again, I barely made the minimum because I'd never thrown a javelin in my life. But it was kind of interesting. It's a heavy instrument.
Yeah, it's very technical. It's very technical.
Yeah, yeah.
So talking about girls, which was the... did you have any socials? Did you have any...
We had the matric dance. That was the be-all and end-all of it. So I didn't really have a steady girlfriend at that time. So I would find somebody who had a sister or something like that and say, hey, would she like to go to the matric dance? And, had some successes, some not. But yeah, it was kind of interesting.
Not even Rodine. I mean, it was right across the road. There was...
between us and them, a great gulf was fixed. So in about 1963, the buddy of mine, Dave Matthews, we had down St. Patrick's Road, there was a stormwater drain. Mm-hmm. And we could go exploring down there, which was terrifying, but it gave you a whole lot of places to go. And also you could smoke down there. So he found out that going down the stormwater drain, after a while, you could pop up like a meerkat and be in roadie. Went down one night and they got there and they got in and they were up in one of the girls' dorms, having a social. And apparently it was tame. Nothing really happened. I have it from the horse's mouth that nothing happened. And I mean, we at that age, we would brag about things we'd never done. And he never bragged. Yeah. It was least he never did it. Anyway, they got caught. And I can't remember. There must have been about 5 of them. They were probably mostly from Nash. I can't remember who else was involved. But anyway, David got expelled. And the guys got punished by probably gating or something, crap like that. There again, David's parents lived in Aden. So they were out. And I maintained that was the only reason. All the other kids had their parents there to bat for that.
Yeah.
So I think Dean Yates was on sabbatical or some crap. And Jeffries was the acting headmaster. And he had done this. I went to him and I said, I think this is shit. Just because Dave's parents and I said, and Dave was a good buddy of mine. So, Jeffries was not backing down. So I went and wrote a letter to the bishop because, the bishop was supposed to be the main man over St. John's or some crap. And I got a nice letter back from the Reverend Stradling, and he just said, you should be able to write to your bishop anytime, but I'm not going to do anything about this. So that was another thing that was a downer for me. I didn't think that was right. But Dave's gone on and done great stuff. He was a bush pilot up in Northeast Africa, like Kenya or somewhere. He was part there, designed an aeroplane. He's done some good stuff. So, yeah.
But he's got some interesting tales.
Again, I've lost touch with him.
We a couple of my mates and I, we broke into Kingsmead and then tried to get into Rodine a couple of times. I know some guys got into Rodine. We got into Kingsmead once. That was fun. Got chased by the security guards. Yeah, that was. It's always the case with boys, isn't it? It's what shouldn't be done has got to be tried.
Oh yeah.
So that was. I'm glad to see that it was. We followed on from guys who'd done it many times before, many years before.
Yeah. And if something before, you've got to do something even more daring just to show you better than they are.
Well, absolutely. But the thing is, you don't know what's gone on before. Every generation every year thinks that what they've done is the first time it's been done.
Yeah.
And had we known that story from you, we would have had to up it. So in a way, I'm glad that we didn't know, because we would have done something really stupid. But yeah, we didn't get. Well, I didn't get caught at that particular time. But yeah, I mean, it's. I was going to ask about sort of like the formality, like when you went out. Is it like the movies in America, where it's the sort of 50s, 60s, where you'd go out for, you'd have a jacket and tie on going out for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I kind of alluded it in the thing I did for the site on Facebook about our school tour. We went on a tour, sports coat, tie, slacks, everything was formal. And on Sundays when we went out, you had to wear your uniform going out, and you had to wear your uniform coming back in. What you did at home during the day, nobody worried about. But when
Yeah.
you came dressed correctly, and by and large for chapel, I mean, the morning chapel, you could be wearing your khakis or anything like that, except during Lent. In Lent, they would have a mass every day in the crypt for guys who wanted to go because it was Lent. And they would have this service in the afternoon so that everybody could go, day boys, boarders, anybody could go to it. And at that stage, you could go in rugby kits to the chapel, and you
Really?
just took your boots off before you got there, because in those days we had the proper ones with studs, that were going. But other than that, you could go in rugby clothes. That was kind of cool.
That's different as well. And where did you go? Like at the end of term, where did you go on holiday? Did your family go away?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that my mom had to work for me to go to St. John's, so she got a job with Pan Am Airways, and we got pretty much free travel. And so we would quite often go to Europe, because Pan Am would fly from Joburg all the way up to like Morocco, and then head across to New York. Well, they would go up to Lisbon, and we would jump in Lisbon and go to Europe. Well, for us in those days, the south of Europe was dead cheap. And for us, and getting the free airfare, it was almost cheaper for us to go to Europe than to go to Durban. So I
Yeah.
had urban holiday when I was 17. All my buddies have gone down to Umhlanga Rocks and this and that, and I'd never been. Yeah, but those travels came to make another big impression on me. Back in '61, we'd been to the States. We'd spent about 3 weeks in the States in the June, July holiday. We're coming back, and the Congo had erupted, and Pan Am landed there at Leopoldville Airport, Kinshasa now, but Leopoldville then. The airport was just, the terminal had all bullet holes everywhere, and there were soldiers walking around, but the soldiers had revolted, so you didn't know, just because they had a uniform on, were they good guys or bad guys.
Yeah.
So because we were on these cheap fares, we could get bumped if somebody was going to pay a fare. So we got bumped. So Pan Am left without us, and my folks were saying, it's all going to be fine, we'll be taken care of. But I could tell from their faces and their actions, they were scared shitless.
Yeah.
Sabina came in, and they were full, because the place was a madhouse of people trying to get out. LM came in with the DC-7, and so Joyce went and spoke to the captain, and Joyce was my mom, and he said, I will not leave airline staff here. So they had some seats in the plane. So my gran was in first class. My mom was in tourist class. My dad, fortunately, he had his pilot's license on him. I don't know if he had a card in his wallet. He got to get the jump seat in the cockpit.
Really?
And I got in the back of the plane somewhere. And we got home. So I've had a soft spot for KLM ever since then. They can't do any wrong in my eyes.
That's
But
brilliant.
that really scared me. And to jump the gun hard, it was that kind of independence and things like that. And we could see them in the movies in South Africa, that eventually persuaded me to start the immigration process. I thought, now I've got a wife and kids, I've got these responsibilities, I can't go through that. And so I got recruited and went. So,
And sort of just wrapping up, when was the last time you were at St. John's or in South Africa?
7, and I don't think I went to St. John's then. We were just there. I had just started a new job And so I just got like the week between Christmas and New Year off. I didn't have time to do any sightseeing. We went down there. My wife's parents were still down there at the time, went to see them, went down to the Kruger Park, and I came back. And so I didn't have time to go to the school. After a while, I mean, it'd be nice to go back and show the kids, but it was a different time, different place. As we're talking here, things are so different. It'd be nice to see the buildings, but from what I see, and I don't know, but
I think the way you talk about it and the memories that you've got and the clarity of those memories that you have, that it might be worth
yeah,
Joburg for a couple of days and then down to Cape Town, Garden Route, Game Park with the family, and maybe try and liaise with the Old James Society Association and see if you can gather up a few of your old muckers from
yeah.
that era. It doesn't have to be your year; it can be sort of 3-4 years either side. Try and do that. I'd recommend that. I mean, it's amazing campus that they've got there now.
I have a difficult time understanding what goes on there, because like from all the news I see, like their power outages, their water shortages. There was news coverage, and it happened to show Harton, where they hadn't been able to repair a water main for a year because people kept stealing the stuff. And I thought, everything just seems like Charlie hockey sticks at St. John. Do they have backup generators, or do they?
Yeah, I mean, it's Boer Makaplan, isn't it? The schools there, they've had to make the schools, universities, businesses, and individuals have had to make a plan. The load shedding has eased in the last 6-7 months. Water has been an issue because of massive underinvestment and the corruption, etc. But St. John's, as have most of the other sort of top schools, have made a plan with renewable energy, backup generators,
Yeah,
sinkhole wells, etc., boreholes. So whilst it's a sort of an ongoing project that they have to do to offset the issues that are happening in the outside world, they're still doing a very, very good job. The campus is just beautiful and breathtaking in terms of what it looks like and what they've got for the boys and girls there now. I think it would be worth a visit.
if I had the time to go down there, I definitely would. I'm not saying I have no inclination to go, but yeah.
The way that you talk about it, there's definitely fond memories, and
Oh yeah, best time in my life. I tell you, it was the best time.
yeah, I agree. It was some of the best times of my life as well. Hence why we're sitting here and I'm talking to you 22 years apart.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Listening to a lot of the same stuff, but also some differences, and surprised me on something. I thought it would be more strict back then, but it was more strict in some ways in my time.
Yeah.
And like uniform and things like that. But yeah, absolutely so fascinating and such a pleasure to have you. And thank you for supporting the group and taking the time to come on.
Anytime. Fun memory.
Absolutely.
Thanks for all the work that you put into it.
No, it's my pleasure. And hopefully one day we'll have a glass of wine together.
Sounds cool.
Thanks, Ray. Have a great day. Love to the family. And I'll see you online.